everyone! For my activity presentation, I had decided to base it off of Lesson Plan 3. For my Lesson Plan 3, it is an activity called Legoland Bakery. This can be taught at any grade level, although for my lesson plan, I decided to target second grade. The materials that you'll need for this lesson are crayons, 4 different colored Legos, a pencil, and also I have attached this down below for you guys to take a look at, my handout for this activity. The estimated time for this activity is 30 to 40 minutes, although this can change because students either sometimes need more time to complete this activity or they need less time. It all depends on how they are grasping the information. For this activity, this can be either taught in whole group, small group, partners, or individualized instruction. The connection to the center that this activity falls underneath is standard 2.G.A.3, which is partitioning circles and rectangles into 2, 3, or 4 equal shares. Describe the shares using the words halves, thirds, half of, a third of, and etc. And describe the whole as 2 halves, 3 thirds, and 4 fourths, recognizing that the equal shares of identical wholes need to not have the same shape. The key math content for this activity falls underneath Math Practice 2, Math Practice 4, and Math Practice 5. Math Practice 2 is when students reason abstractly and quantitatively by creating representation of a problem given by using fractions to fill out a pie chart. Math Practice 4 is when students use models such as a pie chart to solve and model out the problem. Math Practice 5 is using tools provided such as Legos, charts to understand and solve the problem. The activity description that I have provided to you in the handout is when this activity starts, the students and I will read the directions to the activity on the packet. I will then go over key math content that will guide them through the lesson. I will show them a little intro to reducing fractions as well. Then they will identify and create fractions based on the colored dots provided below. While they are doing that, I will have them write the number of blocks that they see for each color down on the table. At this point, if there are fractions that could be reduced, the students and I will identify them and work through them together. After they complete that section, I will have them color in the pies based on the fractions they came up with above. Then, once they are all filled in, report below the fraction of the pies that weren't bought. Through that, together, the students will identify those fractions and reduce them if possible. To close the lesson, I will also be giving them an exit ticket to write down what they learned that day. What is something new they learned that day, Just so they can think back and say, I learned something new. Or if they grew on an idea that they already knew about and they wanted to. Another thing that I will be adding to this lesson is an exit ticket, which will provide a question such as, what is something new that you have learned today in class or have expanded on in this class? This is where the students will tell me if they have learned something new or if they have extended on a sort of idea that they have already known about but didn't know fully. Some questions to ask during this lesson are, imagine that the 8 pieces of Lego blocks, in quote, the dots, represent a pie made in the Legoland Bakery in this case. What were the fractions they came up with for each pie? Can anyone identify fractions they think that can be reduced? How did you know that was the reduced form of a fraction? The questions that I will be asking throughout the lesson is, imagine that the 8 pieces of Lego blocks, in quote, the dots, represents a pie made in Legoland Bakery in this case. What were the fractions they came up with for each pie? Can anyone identify fractions they think can be reduced? How did you know that was the reduced form of the fraction? What were the the fractions they came up with for the pies that didn't get bought. Can you color in the pies based on the fractions you came up with above? So I will be asking this throughout the lesson just so they can keep thinking and reiterating what they are learning and what they are doing, so that I can have participation going into the lesson so students are verbally learning and also visually learning at the same time. So for the first part of this activity, number 1, imagine that these 8 pieces of Lego blocks, in quote, the dots, represent a pie made in the Legoland bakery in this case. Identify and create fractions based on the colored dots provided below. Write the number of blocks that you see of each color down. Reduce if possible. So as you see, there are 2 red dots, 3 blue dots, and 2 yellow dots, and also 1 green dot. So below down here, I have created fractions, so all they have to do is put the number they see down. So that is what we are going to do. So as you can see, I went through the chart and I have added numbers into them. At this point, once the students are done completing this step, I will then ask them to raise their hands if they see a fraction that can be reduced. Now, say the child I asked on is named Robert. He will say, hopefully, that the red and the yellow can be reduced. And at this point, I will say, okay. And then if another student says, I think red and blue, I will say okay too. So then I will pull the group together and I will say, okay, let's work on these together. Let's see if they can be reduced. So to reduce these fractions, we're going to start with raspberry red, which is 2/8. I will tell the students that if there is an even bottom, that the only way it can be reduced if there is an even top. So I will ask the students what they think can go into 2 and 8, which hopefully the students will say 2. And at that point, I will tell them that that will equal 1/4, which is correct. Then we'll move on to blueberry, which for blueberry is 3/8. And hopefully the students will know that that is not a fraction they can reduce. And then the next pie that we'll go to is apple, which is 1/8, which is also a fraction that cannot be reduced, which hopefully the students will recognize that from the example above. The last pie that they will look at is the lemon meringue, which is 2/8. And hopefully they notice that above the raspberry red is the same fraction they worked on above. So then they can say, oh, then 2 goes into 2 and 8, which will equal 1/4. So hopefully by now they will understand how to properly reduce a fraction. So for my discussion board question for you guys is, what would you do if a student was struggling with reducing even after the fact that we did the first time together? And what would be some strategies you would take to prevent that furthermore?